This is Leo Meyer and my co-host,
Dolly Curtis,
bringing you a new edition of Backstage Buzz. And we have tonight a very interesting gentleman who's going to shed a whole different viewpoint on show business and the magic that ends up on the stage through the hard work of people known as the designers. And I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Peter Ling. Peter, you're on.
I'm delighted to be here, and it's so rare to be sat around a table with an eminent designer like yourself, Leo. And we rarely get to talk to each other, us designers.
Well, that's because I retired and I want to run screaming into the night after so many years in the business. But it was a wonderful time and a wonderful career, and as we say, it was for me a good run. But you're still busy working and having come from England, and where you worked as a set designer for many years.
That's right, and I also spent 15 years of my career as a teacher in London, teaching the subject of stage design or scenography, as it's later become known in Europe. And I think every generation of theatre makers, and rightly so, creates their theatre and creates new ideas for the theatre. So the theatre is forever moving forward and forever changing. And I think that's the absolutely delightful thing about the theatre, is that it reflects the time in which it's made and the people in it. So it's reflective of our lives, and if it's to stay alive, which it always will always be dying and then being reborn.
But I want you to explain exactly what the designer does, because our audience goes to the theater and the curtain goes up and they have no idea, they don't have a clue as to where this production came from or how it evolved and how it got on the stage, and it's up to you to explain a little bit of that for us.
Okay, the word theatre comes from the Greek, which is theatron, which means a place of seeing. Now, there's also the auditorium, which is a place of hearing. And if you combine those two, your hearing and your seeing, then the designer either is a sound designer or a set and costume or lighting designer. And my role has been very much as a set and costume designer. Now, what do I do?
Yes, I'm a producer, for instance, and I come to you and I hand you a script.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the next step?
Okay, so the next step is to interpret those words, those characters, those actions, that story, into a series of images, in your mind's eye. What am I seeing when I'm hearing these voices? What is it, the likely actions that they are taking? And how does that look? And how does that sound? And who are these people? And what do they look like? And what are they wearing? And why are they wearing that and not that? Why is he wearing a blue tie and why is he not wearing a tie at all? And so on and so on and so on and so on. So there's a whole lot of decision making which goes on with the designer in that conjuring up the images that the writing or the writer somehow is evoking in the story.
So it's an extension of the writer's art.
Absolutely, and the play is the thing, has always been my motto, in that sense that the writer is the primary artist. The writer is creating something from which we all gather around and in a collaborative form make the piece of writing come off the page and onto the stage.
And to create an entire world, an entire environment. Now,
I think that's right. I think that word "world" is very important. We are creators of little worlds.
A new world for this particular event to take place.
So do you start with sketches you make, you as the...
Scribbles.
That's what I meant, sketches.
Yes, actually, a lot of designers, they're not necessarily great artists in terms of being able to draw very well. In America, it's more the case that you are able to draw rather well. I mean, I've seen more renderings of stage sets and stage environments than I ever saw in Europe. And, I admire these beautiful renderings that you do. In England, and particularly, we tend to work not so much in painting or rendering the scenes, but in creating models, scale models, which show the stage or the world that we're trying to create in 3 dimensions.
So you would basically really begin work with a model, and tell us about the association with the director, who has to be pleased.
Yes, the director. The director is somebody that you really need to have an open and honest relationship with, one that you can feel able to say what you want to say without fear of it being wrong or the wrong thing to say, or not quite in the same vision that the director might have, or that you've really got to be open to their ideas, but you've also got to expect the director to be open to your ideas. So it's a genuine collaboration. It only works if there is that openness. And I have had directors who said to me, "What I want is this, and I want it like that." And I've said, "Well, you don't need me then, because you know what you want, and you can just."
Have you directed and designed both on the same show?
In a way, I don't. A director works most of the time with the actors. They're in rehearsal day in, day out, and putting the show together on its feet, if you like. The director works initially with the designer. To answer your question, have I ever chosen to direct? No, because I feel that I'm more suited to working with images and pictures, stage pictures, than with the actors. But I would say that as a designer, I can also wear, if you like, a director's hat, in that I'm directing the sequence of visual images.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've directed plays and not designed the play, and had somebody else do the set, so that I could concentrate on my association with the performers and helping them and teaching and guiding them into a performance. But it's very hard to let go of an aspect that ordinarily I would be in my grip,
I think that's wonderful. I wish I was as brave as you were to do that.
Especially, Leo, that you've done fabricated so many sets, that could be really something for you to not be in position controlling.
Well, it's like I guess watching your baby to walk the first time, and you have to let go and concentrate on what's at hand.
But I think it's very interesting because when you're designing costumes, you're working very closely with the actors.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Your relationship with the actors is a very, very important one. Has to be a level of trust. You really have to understand that the actor knows what your thinking is, and you have to listen to the actor too. So there's a relationship there, and it's an important one. I was a failed actor. I was in a school production of Iolanthe and was.
Oh yes, and you were.
I was cast as a fairy, and I was a bad fairy. I was no good, and the English master said, "Get that boy Ling off the stage and give him some scenery to do." Well, of course, I was delighted because I thought, I can paint and build and things like that, and I thought that's much better than being a fairy out front on a stage full of other boys. I don't really want to do that, so. But ever since then, I've had great respect for actors, and I love actors, especially good ones. So, my relationship with them when I'm costuming them is very, very essentially a vital one. I was once in a fitting, and the actor who was in Midsummer Night's Dream, and the actor who was playing one of the leading men was sick, and but the wardrobe mistress said, "We've got to get this fitting done. You are the same size as him. Would you please put on the costume that you've designed, and I can just check it out for whether it fits." which I did, and I had, for the first time in my life, had to wear doublet and hose, which is, tights and Elizabethan garb. And I learnt so much from that experience about what it was to be transformed by, into another century at another time through, wearing those clothes. And I really was helped by that situation.
But sometimes I know some actors and actresses are apt to drive you insane because they say, well, I look good in this and I look good in that and I don't want to wear that, and they get fussy and difficult, and sometimes they have to be slapped down a little bit.
Well, that's very true. And I once did a pantomime in England where I probably shouldn't mention the actress's name, but she was rather well known. And
mention the name.
No, I didn't. And anyway, she was playing Queen Rat in a production of Dick Whittington. It was a pantomime in Richmond in London. And I designed this quite extraordinary Queen Rat costume, which was made with the most exotic fabrics and looked really shiny and green and black and quite evil. Anyway, she, come the fitting, she put it on. She said, "This is marvellous. I love this. This is great. I'm wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much." So I was delighted. And then when it came to the dress rehearsal, I very soon realised there was something wrong. And it was the fact that the other actors in the dressing room had said to her, "You can't wear that costume. You really cannot wear that costume." And she said, "Oh, why not?" She said, "Well, people won't recognise you. People won't know who you are. They won't know that it's you." And in fact, they were just jealous, really, of the look that we'd given her. She was originally delighted with it. And so she came back to me and she said, "I can't wear it." I said, "Why not?" "Because they say I can't wear it. Nobody will recognise me in the bar afterwards."
Oh, my heavens.
Very important.
Of making the play a success. That was her goal, was to be recognized.
Now,
Well, actors, they thrive on recognition and their audiences and all that stuff. I understand that, and we did alter the costume a little bit to make sure that people knew that it was this particular person when she came on.
Now, your basically your background is legitimate stage presentations. Have you done film?
No, I haven't. But I was known as, quite early on in my career, I was known as Projection Pete, because I was kind of like one of the pioneers, or first designers to use, actually influenced by a Czech designer called Svoboda.
Oh, Joseph Svoboda.
Joseph Svoboda,
Yes,
and my tutor, Patrick Robertson, who was very keen on using projected scenery, and I sort of caught that bug. It was that time, and so I did use a lot of filmic images or projected images in my early days. Yeah.
But in film in Hollywood and the whole movie industry, the role of the designer becomes known as the art director, and it's up to the art director not only to eyeball everything, eyeball the locations, help select, and to supervise anything that is going to appear on the screen, so that the job becomes a very widespread activity.
Yeah, and in a way I think that's true in the theatre. We are responsible for everything that is seen. Everything matters. I once did a production of a Brecht play called The Fears and Miseries of the Third Reich in Croydon in England, and near London, and unfortunately the play was seen as subversive by a rather unfortunately fascist group of young people, skinheads, who came into the theatre on a Saturday matinee and pulled down half the set because there were lots of Nazi flags on the set, and the setting was a Hitler Youth camp. They pulled down the set and they ordered the actors, who were in German uniforms, military uniforms, to take off their uniforms. It was a fairly scary situation. And,
were they at gunpoint?
No, but it was a very threatening situation.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't there, fortunately, but what I found out, and they let off stink bombs, and the audience sat there amazed. They couldn't believe what's going on, and they just thought, okay. And the people said, "You should leave the theatre now, and this is a disgrace, and you're being conned," and so on and so forth. And the play, by the way, is a very interesting play about the rise of Hitler. And anyway, having been ordered to take off their military uniforms, they did so, and there, unfortunately, were modern underwear underneath underneath the German uniforms, which of course reveals the fact that we're all make believe, and that they were wearing paisley boxer shorts underneath these, which of course you wouldn't have worn in 1936. Right. So I was very upset by that. But anyway, eventually they lost. They lost courage and they left the theatre, and the audience burst into a round of applause, thinking this was all part of the show, and this was showing how very relevant what the writing was that Brecht was saying about the rise of Hitler, even today. This was in 1981. So yes, we have to keep our eye on everything, but we can't always account for the costumes being taken off and revealing the wrong period underwear.
That's a funny story.
It's a wonderful story. Well, tell us what now you're working here in the United States, and I'm sure the working framework is very different from working in the UK. Yeah,
we have. I think it's largely to do with how the arts are funded in America to Britain. In England we have, and Scotland we have, and Wales and Northern Ireland we have a thing called the Arts Council. So the Arts Council is actually an arm of government which affords the arts, and so all the big companies and a lot of the small companies too are subsidised by through taxpayers' money. So that, in other words, they value the profession of theatre, the profession of dance, the profession of music. All the arts are supported through government, and again through local government, through separate subsidies or grants. There is commercial theatre as well, of course, but we find that in America, it's much more about the commercial theatre, and much more about the stresses and the needs to afford buildings.
In America, everything is not funded with public money.
No,
it's private investment or corporate investment.
And we have that too in England, but it's not solely that. There is like the RSC, the National Theatre, and all the regional repertory companies.
But it must be reflected in the salaries that are paid to. Do English actors earn the kind of salaries that the actors on Broadway or in film here?
I believe they do. I mean, there are the Union of Equity
what we call star salaries.
Well, I can't tell you exactly that, but there's an equity rate for actors working in different theatres, different grades of theatres. So I imagine, the higher the grade, the higher the minimum salary must be. And the actors have agents, and they can demand whatever
they rob everybody blind. The agents do very well.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, I would say that what I love about American theatre is there is this wonderful thing called summer stock, which summer stock is it?
Yes.
And and I think we need to get that back on its feet again, and more of it. I'm all for it, and I think it's great that these summer seasons where people can go to these small theatres in around the country and see plays. I think it's wonderful, and it's a great part of the culture of American theatre. There
used to be what was known as the Council of Stock Theatres, and it had members were theatres all up and down the East Coast, up and into the Midwest, and a lot of the productions would tour all of these theatres, but each theatre did negotiate independently, and the salaries were not uniform. Theater, because the theaters were very different sizes, so they had to negotiate separately. But I know a producer I worked for in summer stock had 3 large theaters. The Intimate Theater was 2,500 seats, and the largest theater was 7,000 seats.
Wow.
And he used to pay staggering salaries and the council tried to stop him from paying those kind of salaries because it made negotiating the other theater is very difficult. And he said, I don't care if that star is going to fill my theater, I'm paying them whatever I want to pay them. And I'm not going, and so he finally bowed out of the organization. But unfortunately, that organization doesn't exist any longer. It'd be nice if something like it were reintroduced. Would be healthy for the industry, I think.
So was it mostly all summer stock at first? Like here, Westport Playhouse.
Westport was one of those, one of the theaters
Right,
in that group. It was called,
And Ivoryton must have been another one.
right, Algonquin, Cohasset, all these theaters up and down
And then
to
when
New
did
England.
this change into all year round theater?
Well, it's since television came in, and the actors are working in units of like 13 weeks of
Right.
shooting, and so they would try to book. They have to book differently. They can't take a whole summer. So
that would make a big difference.
Yeah,
And it's the 50s.
they're not available.
The early 50s is when television was starting to blossom.
So that helped
Okay.
to change things. So that would have to be worked out very carefully.
When I was at training to be a designer at Nottingham College of Art, my tutor walked in and said, I have a job for somebody, anybody interested? And fortunately, I was the only person in the studio at the time. Everybody else had disappeared to the pub, I think. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. And so okay, all right, this is the address. I called them, and they were delighted that somebody wanted to do 10 plays in 10 weeks. 10 plays in 10 weeks. In other
So-
words,
We did it all the time.
Leo
it's called
did that.
weekly rep. You did that?
He did
That's
all
a,
the
music,
time,
a
Leo.
musical a week
Wow.
on a 50-foot
Wow.
50-foot stage.
And I built and painted the sets and did all the rest of it. That was that was it.
I worked in very large theaters, like in St. Louis, where we had 26 union carpenters
Right.
and 13 scenic painters
Right.
to execute everything. But it was done in a week.
Right. That's great. That's great that you had all that. With me, it was just me.
Yeah.
And it was amazing what we were able to achieve. We used to.
But the time runs out, and the time
but
element is
I stayed up all night. I was 19. I had the energy then. I
Right.
could do it.
You can
But
do it
I
as a
wouldn't want to
kid.
do it now, but I could do it then. And I look back at it and think that's when I became a designer. I'd done 10 plays.
And
But I went into my final year at college, and I'd already done design.
you learn how to flip the seats
people paying
down,
for tickets.
flip the seats down, and sleep on the sleep on the seat cushions.
Yeah, that's right.
But Leo always refers to that he used to do 10 play or a play a week. That was how they used to work. in the summertime.
Sometimes I had to do 2 different plays in 2 different theaters in a week, which was a little difficult.
And now they run the plays 3 weeks mostly, right?
Right.
They
Yeah.
preview them, then they have to.
2 weekly, 3 weekly rep. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now again,
I don't know how we
change.
did it when I think back working those kind of schedules. But were you trained as an architect?
No, my parents are both architects, and I suppose I was around the idea of creation and making stuff, and looking at buildings and understanding how.
So in England, the designer doesn't do his own drafting?
Yes, the
or-
designer does their own drafting. Yeah.
What about the model making?
The designer does the model making.
And I see.
What we don't do is the rendering, and I'm full of admiration for that skill, which I don't have. But the model making is always done by the designer, and the drafting is always done by the designer.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I guess at at a higher level, that you can get your work drafted elsewhere. But nowadays it's all done on computers, so
Right.
I know, and we used to. I had a scenery company for many years, and we used to get computer draftings, and everyone hated working from them because so many of the line values, the values of the pencil line, was all uniform, and everything looked the same.
Yeah, and I think it affects the way the design looks ultimately. I think you can tell something's been designed on a computer, or you can tell something's been hand done, hand to eye.
Right. There's no substitute for handcrafted work. It's true.
You know, and it's the same is true as architecture. Architecture is all now designed on a computer, and you can tell.
Well, I used to love if I had time to be able to design a show or a ballet, and then actually do a lot of the finished painting on it and touch it up myself.
It's personality, isn't it? It's some kind of it's poetry if it's hand to eye.
I did a Coppelia one time for Dame Markova, and I remember her coming down onto the stage one morning, and I was on the stage touching something up on one of the backdrops, and she came over and she said, "Oh, Mr. Meyer," she said, "I remember working with Chagall, and Chagall used to love to come down onto the stage and do finished painting on his own work," which I thought was quite wonderful. And
I once had to be a ghost designer for an American designer, in fact, a guy called Boris Aronson.
Oh, yes.
Who designed the original Broadway production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
And of course, Boris had passed away, and they were going to put on a brand new production of Fiddler on the Roof in London, starring Topol. And I was asked to step into his shoes and be Boris Aronson. That was kind of interesting.
And he was stepping into Chagall's shoes.
Exactly. So I was Chagall
for
and
that,
Aronson.
right? For that particular production, and because I also had an experience very similar with the production of that toured here, and Boris had already passed away, but his wife Lisa was supervising and brought all his original sketches, and we worked from those renderings. But that was an exciting experience because the working from
archival
stuff is a great treat.
It's a real discipline that you're really wanting to. You're thinking through somebody else's eyes.
And in order to be successful, you have to forget your own desires and your own aspirations and say, well, I'm going to be brilliant in reproducing this, and that can be wonderful too.
I think that's what I enjoyed about teaching so much, is that you were working with young people who were bringing their ideas forward. They were wanting to do it their way, quite rightly, and you had to put yourself aside from that. So you say to them, okay, what I'm going to do is to interrogate your thinking. That, I think, could be helpful to you. But I'm not going to do the thinking for you. I will question why you do this, why you do it like that. And I will encourage you to self-interrogate too. And I think that's a good way to bring young people forward and on with their work. I think every generation of theatre makers brings their own tastes, their own ideas, their own thinking to it. And I think that nowadays in the digital age, even though I'm not Mr. Digital, I'm probably analog. I have to say, over to you. I've passed the baton on to the next generation of theatre designers, I do think it'll be different, and the way theatre is made will be different from the last, and it'll be different from the next, and the next after that. So that's what I mean about theatre constantly being reborn.
Reborn, exactly.
And dying. There are certain theatres which have gone now, or certain ways of doing theatre that have gone, and that's not to say that they were bad in their time, not at all.
But it's wonderful
to
be able to turn it over to young people and to get them to honor the style of the work or the research involved in it, and to do brilliant work. Well, Peter, this conversation has to come to an end, unfortunately. Our airtime is
it's too bad, because you two are marvelous listening to you speak.
Well, we have common ground to work from.
I knew you would have that.
But it's been a pleasure. Our guest tonight was Mr. Peter Ling.
Thank you, Leo.
A well-known scenic designer here in Connecticut, transferred from the UK. And Dolly, I know